Hey guys, it's Ty the Dog Guy here, and I want to talk about a topic that has some controversial aspects to it. And I'm referring to, in fact, this is going to be a little bit longer one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up into three parts. But here's the concept. As a lot of folks know, I am a dad. I have 4 daughters. I think they're great most of the time. And I currently have 1 dog. I think she's great, a little bit more often than my daughters. My dog is far better mannered than my kids. But in any case, in my years of dog training, I've come and parenting, I've recognized that there's a lot of similarities between dogs and kids, but I take a very different concept in correction. And as I say this, I don't mean judgment on anybody. I don't really care what other people do as long as they're not being abusive. But I don't spank my kids. I don't use any sort of physical correction with my kids. I don't spank them, grab them, stuff like that. I don't use any sort of physical correction. Whereas with my dogs, both my dogs and the dogs that we train for clients, I do use physical correction. Tugs on the leash, training collars, e-collars, spray bottles, stuff like that. And so I've had trainers say, well, how dare you? Or people say, well, how dare you use corrections with dogs? Would you do that with your kids? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. And there's reasons why. And so I want to get into the 3 main reasons why I do use correction with dogs and I don't use physical correction with kids. I do use other types of correction with kids, and I'll get into that. But I do use physical correction with dogs and don't use it with kids. So 3 main reasons. Reason number 1 here is what I'm going to talk about today. Number 1 is I have completely different goals for my dogs and my kids. My dog, who's at my feet right now, will always be dependent on me. Always. For here and for eternity. I am not going to set my dog loose out in the forest and hope she learns how to fend for herself. Whereas that's completely different with my kids. My whole purpose, I believe, in life, with my children, is to teach them how to be strong, independent young women that turn into adult women that go off and have their own lives and do their own things. I want my daughters to be self-possessed. I want them to be educated. I want them to be smart. I want them to be independent. I want them to be all these things so that they can do what they want with their life. I don't want that for my dog. I don't want my dog to be I want my dog to make good choices, like I want my kids to make good choices, but I don't have this goal for my dog that she goes off and becomes this independent creature that doesn't need me and doesn't need anybody, can take care of herself on her own. Frankly, they're just 2 entirely different goals. Now, this lays the premise of the other 2 main things that I'm going to talk in upcoming videos and podcasts here. And like I say, this is just the premise, because the reality is, just because I have different goals doesn't mean I couldn't use physical correction with both, or I couldn't use, not use physical correction with both. I'm simply stating as a foundation that I'm looking to do completely different things with my dogs and my kids. So this notion of if you wouldn't do it with your child, why would you do it with your dog, is flawed from the very beginning, because I also don't feed my kids raw meat, which I do to my dogs. I also don't put my kids in crates, which I do to my dogs. I also don't put a leash to my kids' collar. They don't wear a collar. I don't put a leash to my kids' neck and make them poop in the yard. There's lots of things that we don't do, one versus the other. And so that needs to be part of the premise here, that we can't compare apples to apples when we're talking dogs and kids. We simply can't, because our goals are different, our kids are different, everything is so different. Even though there might be similar learning patterns and learning behaviors, and we'll talk about that in upcoming videos and podcasts, even though we can find some similarities, there are enough large, massive differences that we simply need to approach our kids and our dogs differently, and can't be, like I say, can't be doing apples to apples and oranges to oranges comparisons. It's complete apples to oranges, kids to dogs. So that's our premise. Upcoming here, we're going to be talking about other reasons why I feel it's important to use physical correction with dogs and not with kids.